I want to begin by being careful about my own title, because I saw China's economy up close, and "we are not ready" is a phrase that can be read in a way I do not intend. And the way I do not intend is the way that would make the whole reflection worthless. So let me foreclose it immediately. When I say we are not ready, I do not mean that China is a threat, an enemy massing at the gates, a danger coming to take something from us. I am not making that argument, and I have no interest in the atmosphere of hostility and fear that surrounds so much talk about China, because that atmosphere is both intellectually lazy and practically corrosive, and it obscures far more than it reveals. And I equally do not mean that the West is finished, or doomed, or about to be overtaken in some final and catastrophic way, because that too is false. An exaggeration that discredits the genuine observation. It distorts. What I mean by "we are not ready" is something more precise and I think more useful, and it is this. I saw in those 10 days a level of seriousness and discipline and long horizon building that made me reflect with genuine discomfort on how unprepared most Western societies and most individuals within them actually are, not for an attack, but for a genuinely more competitive world, a world in which the comfortable assumption of permanent dominance no longer holds. The unreadiness I am describing is not a vulnerability to an enemy. It is a lack of preparation for a reality, and it is a reality that is arriving whether or not anyone is ready for it. Let me be careful, as always, about the two extremes, because this is a subject where people rush to one of them and both are wrong, and the errors here are especially costly. The first extreme is the threat narrative, the framing in which China is an adversary, and the appropriate response is fear and hostility and defensive alarm. And this framing is wrong, not because there are no genuine tensions in the world, but because it fundamentally misreads what I am pointing at, which is not a threat from outside, but an unpreparedness within. The second extreme is the complacent dismissal, the comfortable insistence that we are still dominant, that the concerns are overblown, that the West's position is secure and requires no particular effort to maintain. And this is the more dangerous error precisely because it is the very complacency I am trying to describe, the assumption of permanence that is itself the core of the unreadiness. The truth is neither hostility nor complacency. The truth is that seriousness observed elsewhere is a mirror, not a threat. And what it reflects back is our own lack of preparation, and the appropriate response is neither to fear the mirror nor to look away from it, but to attend honestly to what it shows and to get ready. So let me think carefully about what readiness actually is and what unreadiness looks like, because the whole reflection turns on this, and it is worth being precise. Readiness for a structural shift is not a military or defensive matter, and it is not about any particular adversary. It is a matter of seriousness, of adaptability, of preparation, of the willingness to do the difficult, unglamorous, long horizon work of building genuine capability, rather than coasting on an inherited position. And unreadiness, correspondingly, is the state of a society or a person that has been optimized for a stable and dominant position that is now ending, a state that is comfortable, complacent, that has quietly substituted comfort for discipline over a long period of prosperity, that operates on short horizons and assumes that the current position is permanent and requires no particular effort to sustain. The unready are not threatened by an enemy. They are threatened by their own lack of preparation for a more competitive reality, by the gap between the seriousness the new reality demands and the comfort the old reality permitted. And the danger is entirely internal, which is precisely why it is so difficult to perceive, because there is no external villain to point at, only the slow accumulation of one's own complacency. Let me develop the first and most important dimension of unreadiness, which is the one I felt most acutely, and it is the substitution of comfort for discipline. I want to be careful here, because this observation is easily misread as a kind of moralizing about softness, and that is not what I mean. I am not idealizing hardship, and I do not think comfort is inherently bad. Genuine human flourishing includes comfort, includes leisure, includes the space for enjoyment that prosperity makes possible, and I would never argue against that. But there is a specific form of comfort that is economically corrosive, and it is the comfort that mistakes the current level of prosperity for an indication of permanent superiority rather than a temporary position in a dynamic and competitive landscape. The society that becomes comfortable with its position, that relaxes the discipline and the seriousness and the investment that produced the position in the first place, is a society that is over long horizons trading its future position for its present comfort. And what I observed elsewhere was not the absence of comfort, but the presence of a seriousness alongside it, a focused, disciplined, long horizon seriousness in the professional and economic culture that made me see, by contrast, how much of the West had allowed comfort to displace discipline, how much of our prosperity had become the assumed baseline rather than the actively maintained achievement, and how unprepared that leaves us for a world in which the position must be earned again rather than merely inherited. The principles that determine how to prepare yourself for a genuinely more competitive reality, how to build the seriousness and the capability that readiness requires rather than coasting on an inherited position, are worth studying deliberately and as a connected whole. And there is a body of work that lays them out carefully called the Naval Codex. It is not a set of tactics, and it is not a program of self-discipline in any narrow sense. It is a systematic account of the underlying principles that determine who builds genuine, durable capability, the kind that constitutes readiness for a shift rather than mere comfort within a vanishing stability. If you want to engage with those principles directly, it is linked in the description, and there's a code on the screen you can scan to reach it. And engaging with the principles directly is what matters, because the principles of genuine capability hold regardless of whether the society around you is prepared, and readiness, as I will argue, is available to the individual even when the collective remains unready. The second dimension of unreadiness is about time horizons, and it is the one that struck me first in the infrastructure before I had words for it. What the infrastructure communicated was not primarily its own impressiveness, but the time horizon embedded in the decision to build it, the willingness to make investments whose full returns arrive in 20 or 30 years as a matter of routine on a horizon that most Western political and economic decision-making simply cannot accommodate, because its incentive structures run on the horizon of the next election and the next quarter and the next report. And this horizon mismatch is a dimension of unreadiness, because readiness for a structural shift requires the capacity to make long horizon investments, to sacrifice present return for future position, to build patiently the capabilities that will matter over decades, and a society whose incentive structures reward only the short horizon is structurally unready to make exactly the investments that readiness would require. And the individual version of this is just as real. Most people plan on short horizons, optimize for near-term outcomes, and are structurally unready for anything that requires the patient, long horizon building that genuine capability and genuine wealth demand. The unreadiness of the short horizon is not a moral failing. It is a structural feature of an incentive environment that has, over a long period of comfort, stopped rewarding the long view. The third dimension of unreadiness is monetary, and it is perhaps the one for which people are least prepared, precisely because they cannot see it. And it connects everything I have been describing to the concrete question of an individual's own position. Most people, and the West broadly, are profoundly unprepared for a world in which the monetary privileges that have been enjoyed for generations begin to erode. The entire structure of most people's financial lives assumes the permanence of the current monetary arrangement, assumes that wealth held in the familiar currency is safe, assumes that the concentration of one's entire economic existence in a single monetary and institutional system is not a risk, because that system is permanent. And this assumption of monetary permanence is a form of unreadiness, because the privileges are not permanent, they are under genuine structural pressure, and the person whose position is built entirely on the assumption of their permanence is unready for the shift in exactly the way that matters most, concentrated in a single eroding claim, with no preparation for a world in which the assumption fails. The way capital actually moves when the monetary order begins to shift, where it flows and why, and what happens to those who are unprepared, concentrated in the assumption of permanence, versus those who prepared by diversifying out of the single system concentration, is worth understanding in its specific mechanics rather than in vague outline. And there is a framework that traces exactly this called the dragon pivot. Despite the name, it is not really about any single country. It is about how monetary transitions unfold across history, what they do to the unprepared, and how those who saw the shift early prepared their positions accordingly. It is reachable through the code shown on the screen or through the link in the description for anyone who wants the fuller picture. And that fuller picture is itself a form of readiness, because the deepest unpreparedness is the concentration you cannot see, the assumption of permanence that has become invisible precisely because it is the frame through which everything else is measured. The fourth dimension of unreadiness is about what people own, and it follows directly, because readiness is not merely a matter of mindset, but of position. And the unready hold the wrong kind of thing. The unready hold fragile financial claims, paper assets whose value depends entirely on the continuation of the current conditions, speculation and abstraction disconnected from real production, and these holdings are precisely the ones that are unready for a shift, because their value is contingent on the very permanence that is ending. Readiness, in terms of what you own, means holding genuine productive capability, equity in enterprises that create real value, ownership of things grounded in real economic activity that retains its worth across the transitions that the unready assume cannot happen. The person who owns genuine productive capability is prepared because their position does not depend on the continuation of a comfortable arrangement. The person who owns fragile claims is unprepared because their position depends on exactly the permanence that readiness recognizes cannot be relied upon. The work of distinguishing genuine productive capability, resilient across the transitions that the unready deny, from fragile financial claims that depend on the continuation of current conditions, and of building a position grounded in the former, is worth doing systematically, and there is a framework devoted precisely to that called the Sovereign Vault. It is concerned with building durable, generationally significant wealth, grounded in real productive assets and real institutional protection, the kind of position that is prepared for a shift rather than dependent on its not occurring, rather than in the financial arrangements that constitute unreadiness, dressed as prudence. It is linked below, and the code on the screen will take you straight to it, for anyone who wants to go deeper on the question of what a genuinely prepared position actually holds. And that question is the practical core of readiness, because seeing the shift clearly means little if one remains. Out of the habits of a comfortable era, holding exactly the fragile claims that the shift would counsel against, I want to place all of this within a larger frame, because it is the frame that makes the observation fair rather than merely critical, and it is the frame of stages of trajectory. Because the difference I observed is not, and I want to be absolutely clear about this, a matter of any intrinsic cultural or national or racial characteristic. And the history of civilizational comparison is littered with the wreckage of arguments that smuggled in such claims, and I reject them entirely and without reservation. The difference is a matter of the stage each society is in. There is a stage of intensive building in which a society is constructing its infrastructure and its capability and its institutional knowledge and its economic position. And societies in the building stage exhibit specific characteristics: high investment relative to consumption, high tolerance for present sacrifice in service of future position, high valorization of technical capability and productive competence, and a high sense of the contingency of their position, of the genuine possibility that it will improve with effort and degrade without it. And there is a stage of maintenance in which the prosperity built by earlier generations has become the assumed baseline rather than the celebrated achievement, in which the institutions built to create growth are now oriented toward distributing and defending existing wealth, in which the valorization of building has been partly displaced by the valorization of critique and consumption. And the unreadiness I am describing is a natural condition of a society that has moved from the building stage to the maintenance stage. And it is a stage transition, not a permanent verdict. And this matters enormously because a stage transition is reversible. History includes many examples of societies that appear to be in comfortable decline, reasserting genuine productive ambition in response to competitive pressure recognized in time. The unreadiness is real, but it is not destiny. And the capacity for renewal is present, and the only question is whether the pressure is recognized and the renewal undertaken before the unreadiness has done its damage. But here is the turn that I think matters most. The turn that transforms this from an observation about societies into something you can actually use. And it is this: you cannot control whether your society gets ready. The collective unreadiness is real, and it is largely beyond your individual influence. And if you wait for the society around you to reassert its discipline and prepare itself, you may wait a very long time. But individual readiness is entirely available to you, regardless of the collective. And this is the liberating fact. You do not need your society to be ready in order to be ready yourself. And in fact, and this is the genuinely important part, the individual who prepares while the collective remains unready is not merely as well positioned as they would be in a prepared society. They are unusually well positioned because they are adapting to the real competitive world, while most of the people around them remain optimized for the vanishing comfortable one. And that gap between your readiness and the general unreadiness is itself a source of enormous advantage. The individual who builds genuine specific knowledge while others coast on inherited credentials, who owns productive assets while others hold fragile claims, who diversifies out of single system concentration while others assume permanence, who adopts the long horizon and the seriousness while others remain in the short horizon comfort, is preparing themselves for a reality that most people around them are unprepared for. And the very generality of the unreadiness makes the individual's readiness more valuable, not less. I want to think honestly about why the unready stay unready, why the collective complacency persists, even as the shift becomes visible, because understanding the mechanism is the only defense against being captured by it oneself. The first reason is the comfort of assuming permanence, which is genuinely comfortable, and the discomfort of the alternative, of accepting that the position must be earned again rather than merely inherited, is a powerful motive to avoid the acceptance. The second reason is that discipline is hard when comfort is available and, in the short run, rewarded. The person who reasserts discipline, who sacrifices present comfort for future readiness, appears to gain nothing in the comfortable present, and the comfortable present is what is concretely felt, while the future for which they are preparing is abstract and deferred. And the third reason, the one specific to collective unreadiness, is that unreadiness feels normal and safe precisely because everyone around you is also unready. The complacency is a shared condition, and a shared condition does not feel like a risk. It feels like the natural state of things. And to break from it, to prepare while others coast, is to do something strange and effortful and lonely. And the strangeness of it, the departure from the comfortable consensus of general unpreparedness, is what keeps most people within the consensus unready together, mistaking the universality of the unreadiness for evidence of its safety. I want to be very clear about what I am not saying, because the misreadings of this are especially dangerous, and I want to foreclose them completely. I am not telling you to fear China, or to view it with hostility, or to see the world through the lens of a threat. That framing is wrong, and it is the opposite of what I am pointing at. The seriousness I observed is a mirror, not a threat, and what it reflects is our own complacency, and the appropriate response to a mirror is not fear or hostility, but honest attention to what it shows. This is not about China being an adversary, and it is not about the West being finished, a conclusion I reject. Because the West, and America in particular, retains genuine and durable strengths that are real and that I do not dismiss. The deepest capital markets in the world, an extraordinary innovation ecosystem, a genuine position at the frontier of the most important technology of the age, a culture of entrepreneurship that no other system consistently matches. The point is not that one civilization is rising to conquer another. The point is about readiness, about the gap between the seriousness a more competitive world demands and the comfort a dominant era permitted, and about the fact that readiness, whatever the collective does, is available to the individual who chooses it. So I want to end, as I always do, not with an exhortation, but with an invitation to see clearly and to prepare accordingly, because this is, in the end, one of the oldest pieces of wisdom there is. The serious prepare and the complacent are caught out. Comfort, indulged as permanence rather than enjoyed as achievement, breeds the complacency that the competitive reality eventually punishes. And discipline, the willingness to earn the position again rather than merely inherit it, is what constitutes genuine readiness. This is not new. What is new is only the specific circumstance, the particular seriousness accumulating in one part of the world, and the particular comfort that has displaced discipline in another. And the particular moment in which the gap between them is becoming consequential. We are not ready collectively. And that is the honest observation, and it is real, and it is largely beyond any one person's power to change. But you can be ready. That is the thing I most want to leave you with. The collective unreadiness does not doom the individual, and in fact, it creates for the individual who prepares while others coast an unusual and genuine advantage. Build the genuine capability, own the productive assets, diversify out of the comfortable concentration, adopt the long horizon and the seriousness, prepare yourself for the more competitive reality that is arriving, whether or not the society around you prepares for it. And the value of that preparation, invisible for a long time the way these things always are, through the stretch in which the comfortable consensus still holds and the person who prepares appears merely to be unnecessarily serious, reveals itself the way readiness always reveals itself, which is slowly in the quiet accumulation of capability in a position that most people around you are not building. And then suddenly, at the moment the competitive reality finally arrives and the comfortable era ends and the general unreadiness is exposed all at once, and the individual who prepared while the collective coasted is found to have been all along simply the one who was ready.